Thank you very much for listening to this week's talk on the portion that we read this coming Shabbat of Chayei Sarah. And as with everything in the Torah, but I would say the stories, the events that we read about in the book of Bereshit are something that they contain examples and scenarios that we really learn from eternally, and they will often present to us in very unique ways every time we have an opportunity to read them publicly in the shuls around the world on a weekly basis. And this Shabbat is no exception. So I think that we can actually combine many of the events in this week's Sedra under three basic headings: love of life, love of a wife, and love of the land. And I begin with this idea of love of life, and I think that the Torah's love of life, the value of a life that is such an integral part of the mitzvahs and the ways that the Torah the Torah instructs us to live, in that is the attitude towards aging that we find in this week's Sedra. And it begins, actually, my first reference is going to be after the report of the death and the burial of Sara Imenu, Sara our mother. Chapter 24 begins, Va'avraham zaken ba bayomim. Avraham was old, well on in years. And so this phrase ba bayomim is that he comes with his days, and instead of what is a common attitude towards aging of focusing on the physical effects of aging and really letting that be the dominant concept of aging, this idea of coming with your days means that every day was an opportunity for Abraham to achieve, to accomplish, and that was what defined him. And this is something that people at any stage of life, whether very, very advanced in years or possibly dealing with certain physical ailments and challenges, but the fact, and I have experienced this personally, seen it in so many people around me, that people exactly in this situation, elderly, but they are still engaging, they are still sharing their experiences, they are still contributing to life around them in whatever capacity they can. And I think that this, especially in contrast to attitudes of people or the culture that surround us, where the focus is on youth and the negative aspects of certain negative aspects of physical wear and tear that may happen as we age, they are not the dominant in the Torah view. This, to me, is a real sign of love of life, love of all stages of life, always focusing on what can be done, albeit in different parameters, but still really able to make a fantastic contribution to life. And this is something that is certainly applicable to Avraham Avinu, even as he advances in his years. And this is actually reinforced towards the end of the Sedra, when we find out that Avraham Avinu dies. He dies many years after Sarah, 38 years after Sarah to be precise. But the chapter 25, verse 8 tells us, Vayigva, this is referring to Vayigva Vayamos Avraham, and Avraham expired and died. Beseva Tova, in good old age, Zaken V'Savea, Zakein, it's translated here as an old man, but I think we can come up with, we'll go into that in a moment. V'sover, and satisfied, Vayesef el amav, and he was gathered to his people. And this idea, he lived to a ripe old age. He was actually 175 years old when he died, after Sarah, who passed away at the age of 127. And he, this concept that he was satisfied. Now, Abraham's life was not challenge free by any stretch of the imagination. We have gone through some of the 10 so-called challenges that Abraham had to overcome during his life. His life had many difficulties, but it was a life well lived. It was a life where he was able to look back and reflect that he did the right thing. And I think that this is something that is, again, showing us a love of life, showing us a love of the opportunities that we get as we go through our own personal trials. And with the tools that Hashem gives us, we are able to do the right thing in very extreme circumstances sometimes, and we can then look back and not say that it was easy, but say that there was goodness that came through. And I think that Abraham and Sarah, by extension, are shining examples of this. So that is the love of life. I think that this is we can certainly see that in action in the description, in the attitude towards aging that we find in this week's Sedra. And this leads into the next love, which is love of a wife, and especially we would say Sara and Sara Imenu, Sara our mother, and Abraham Avinu, Abraham our father, are the man and wife that we're referring to. Even though Abraham does have other wives, Sarah even encourages him to take Hagar when she is at that point not able to have a child. And then after Sarah dies, Abraham remarries and he has children, but still Sarah remains his principal wife. And this is the love that he has for Sarah is evident in the way, in this week's Sedra, that he is very determined to buy the first piece of land in Israel so that she will be buried in the land of Israel. And they together were a team. There's a very beautiful acronym for team. Together, everyone achieves more. And I think that this is especially applicable to Abraham and Sarah, that they're uniquely, they go out and they bring people in. They share their discovery of the Creator and the ongoing involvement of Hashem in creation. It's not just a one-off event. It's something that continues, and there is a moral code and there is a responsibility, and all of this is absolutely groundbreaking. And together they work and they bring people into this way of thinking, into this way of life. And it's interesting to note that in the 38 years that pass after Sarah's death, that Abraham is still alive, there is no mention anymore of any kind of creativity, any spiritual contribution that Abraham makes. That really was when Sarah was alive. Together, they were that power couple, and they introduced monotheism into the world. And this is to their credit. And the Medrash tells us that the beautiful concluding words of Mishlei, Proverbs, that is sung in many Jewish households every Friday night, Eshes Chayil, a wife of valor. There are different interpretations about who is this Eshes Chayil, who exactly is it referring to, although in households it is addressed, as it were, personally to the woman of every individual house. Yet there is an opinion that this was the eulogy, this was the hesped that Avraham delivered to his wife Sarah, and all of the praises, all of the capabilities of the woman in Eshes Chayil were originally and specifically addressed to Sarah, our mother, by Avraham, her husband. And this is really showing us this love of the wife of Sarah, his Abraham's wife, and together they are buried in Ma'arat HaMachpelah. And this leads to the third love, the love of the land. And this week's Sedra, opening as it does with the passing of Sarah, and even though it deals with her passing, it is called the life of Sarah. It is called Chayei Sarah. And I think that really shows us the truth that often it is when somebody passes that we become so acutely conscious of their life. And this is just one way of understanding how Chayei Sarah, that is why it earns the title, the heading of Chayei Sarah, because that's what often happens when somebody passes. That turns our focus and our attention very much to the life of that person. And we see that Abraham starts by negotiating. There is this cave in Arat HaMachpelah in the city of Kiryat Arba, Hebron, and at that point, it belongs to Ephron, the Hittite, and the children of Chet. And we see this in chapter 23, verses 3, right through to verse, I would say, right through to verse 20. So we have 17 psukim, 17 verses that give us the minutiae of this, what really sounds like a real estate transaction. And always coming from the position that every single word in the Torah has something to teach us. There is nothing that is superfluous at all. So why do we have to learn all of these transactional details? And the commentators are very quick to pick up on it. So the Ibn Ezra says on verse 23, chapter 23 rather, verse 19 in Bereshit, that I'm just going to read that out. That is and after this, Kovar Avraham es Sarah ishto, Avraham buried Sarah, his wife, El Ma'oris Sedeha Machpelah, in the cave of the field of Machpelah, Al Panei Mamre, facing Mamre, Hi Hebron, which is Hebron, Be'eretz Canaan, in the land of Canaan. And the Ibn Ebra tells us, this portion of the Torah is expounded upon to inform us of the advantage of the land of Israel over all lands, both for the living and even for the dead. And what we are stressing here, and as we look back on the negotiations between Abraham and Ephron the Hittite, and the exact amount of the 400 pieces of silver that are eventually weighed out, even though Ephron says you can just bury your dead, you can do it for free. Abraham wants to acquire a holding, actually a purchase, so that is going to unequivocally show ownership. And the Torah records this, and it's almost the prophecy is something that I think that we are experiencing today, in as much as we look at the words of the commentators, who many of them were living in a time when there was no Jewish sovereign presence in the land of Israel. And we can also refer back to the original, the first verse in the book, in the Torah, actually, in the book of Bereshit, that we read 5 weeks ago. Chayei Sarah is the fifth Sedra. Bereshit bara Elokim es hashamayim ve'es haaretz. And this is Hashem created the world. And Rashi comments, why didn't we start with the mitzvah? If the Torah is a book of teaching, if the Torah is telling us exactly the mitzvot that we need to perform, the mitzvot aseh and the mitzvot lot aseh, the prohibitions that we're not allowed to do. So why doesn't the Torah start with these mitzvahs? And the answer is given that when the nations of the world accuse us of stealing the land of the Canaanites, that we, by saying that God created the world in the beginning and God gives it to who he wants to give it to. In the beginning, he gave it to the Canaanites, and then he wanted to take it away from them and give that to the Jewish people. This is Rashi's explanation on the first verse of the Torah. And Rav Sachs Zatzal, whose Yortzeit, the anniversary of his passing, was the Monday just past, the 20th day of Cheshvan. And he would often say that when Rashi was writing this was a prophecy. Rashi was not living in times when the Jewish people were being accused of stealing anybody's land. And today, as we confront the messages in the media, very often the distortions in the media that we are the occupiers, that we've stolen other people's land, the title deeds that we find are firstly in this reference, this prophecy of Rashi, and this, I would say, the proof of purchase that we find in the portion that we read in Chayei Sarah, the exact transaction. It is not just there to give us a bit of real estate history. It is a title deed. And this is our title deed. And so often we need to internalize that. We need to be confident in that, in the promise, in the prophecy. And then the distortions that are being peddled by the press and the very misleading articles and news items that we're subjected to, they don't need to undermine us, because we have this rock solid proof from the Torah. And the concept of the centrality of the land of Israel for the living and for those who have passed away. And this is written clearly by the Ibn Ezra. And Ramban Nachmanides tells us, the Torah wants to inform us of the burial place of the patriarchs and matriarchs, as we are required to honor the burial places of our holy ancestors, in this case in Hebron. And then the Medrash on these verses that talk about the purchase of the cave of Machpelah states, there are 3 places where the nations of the world cannot castigate the Jewish people and claim that their land is stolen: the cave of Machpelah, the Temple Mount, and the burial place of Joseph. The cave of Machpelah, as it is written, and Abraham weighed out to Ephron the amount of silver that was agreed upon. And this is a quote from the Medrash in Bereshit Rabbah. And I think that we really have the source and the reason for our confidence. And I think that so often when we are wobbly, it's because we lack that. And if we are strong in being able to tap into the words, to the messages of the Torah, we are so able to actually withstand the and respond to whatever allegations are thrown at us. And it's ironical that this week, actually, I read that there was a United Nations resolution passed, and that was the 12th of November, so 3 days ago as I'm talking. UN votes 98 in favour and 17 against to take Israel to the International Criminal Court because of the occupation of Palestine, which will need to end. The 17 who voted against this resolution, so the 17 friends, supporters of Israel, I think it's worth reading them out to show Hakaras Hatov, to show our appreciation of their support, were Austria, Bulgaria, Canada, Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, Estonia, Germany, Guatemala, Hungary, Italy, Liberia, Lithuania, Marshall Islands, Micronesia, Nauru, Palau, and the United States. The 52 abstentions included the United Kingdom and France. In the 98 who voted in favour of this resolution to take Israel to the International Criminal Court were the Ukraine and the Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. So today we are being accused, as Rashi prophesied at the beginning of in his commentary to the opening words of the Torah. And we need to know this. We need to stand firm. We need to look at the title deeds that we have in this week's Sedra. And we need to know that the connection of the Jewish people, the Torah, the Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, the Torah of Israel, and the God of everywhere and the God of Israel they are inextricably linked. And when we look at the concept of love of life, love of wife, love of land, this comes together in the second main portion of this week's Sedra, one of the longest chapters in the Torah, which talks about the finding of a wife for Yitzchak, which is the continuity of the Jewish people. This is something that Abraham turns his focus to after the passing and burial of his beloved wife Sarah. And just again quoting from Rabbi Sachs, as he writes in an essay in Covenant and Conversation, again underscoring the eternal relevance of everything that we're reading in the Torah. It's an essay called Land and Children, and he says, a land, Israel, and children, Jewish continuity. The astonishing fact is that today, 4,000 years later, they remain the dominant concerns of Jews throughout the world, the safety and security of Israel as the Jewish home, and the future of the Jewish people. Abraham's hopes and fears are ours. Now as then, the divine promise does not mean that we can leave the future to God. That idea has no place in the imaginative world of the first book of the Torah. On the contrary, the covenant is God's challenge to us, not ours to God. The meaning of the events of Chayei Sarah is that Abraham realized that God was depending on him. Faith does not mean passivity. It means the courage to act and never to be deterred. The future will happen, but it is we, inspired, empowered, given strength by the promise, who must bring it about. And so we see love of life, love of wife, love of land. We see how we face those very challenges today. And we have been given the tools. We follow in the footsteps of Avraham Avinu and of Sarah Imenu and of our patriarchs and matriarchs, and we are able to have that quiet, calm confidence that comes from really tuning in to the lives and the values of the great people that came before us. Thank you very much for listening and wishing everybody Shabbat Shalom.